I walked into Pinterest Manor, feeling like I was stepping into a magazine spread. White marble floors, a string quartet in the corner, and waiters carrying champagne glasses that probably cost more than my shoes. My sister Brianna had always loved showing off. Today, she was at her peak. She'd booked the most expensive venue in Virginia for her wedding to Marcus Riley, the son of a wealthy defense contractor. Everyone here was dripping in money or pretending to. I was just trying to blend in, wearing a simple navy dress and my grandmother's pearls. It was the kind of outfit that said, "I'm happy for you, but I'm not here to compete." Brianna spotted me from across the room and waved me over like she was calling the help. Her designer dress glittered under the chandelier. She leaned in with that fake sweet smile she always used when she was about to say something cruel. "Everyone," she announced loudly. "This is my sister Colleen. She's the fat pig who thinks she's a soldier." People around us chuckled, thinking it was some inside joke. It wasn't. My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion just gives her more fuel. Marcus stood next to her, smiling awkwardly. It didn't stop her. He never did. The room felt like it had gone silent. Even though the music kept playing, I could feel eyes on me, sizing me up. They saw a woman in her mid-30s with a military haircut and a body built for 12-hour shifts, not Instagram photos. They had no idea who I really was or what I'd done. That was fine. I'd spent years keeping it that way. I reached out to shake Marcus's father's hand. General Leonard Riley was taller than I remembered. Silver hair and a stare that could still freeze a junior officer at 30 Yalat. He looked at me like he was stirring to place a face from an old mission. "Colleen Ward," he said slowly. "That name sounds familiar." I just smiled politely. "I doubt it, sir. I'm just here for the wedding." But his eyes stayed on me a beat longer than normal. Something clicked for him. He didn't say anything, but his posture shifted. I knew that look. Recognition mixed with respect. Brianna was too busy working the crowd to notice. She'd always seen me as the dull sister who joined the army because she couldn't hack it in the real world. She had no idea that while she was spending Dad's inheritance on grad school parties and designer bags, I was on bases at 2 in the morning, figuring out how to keep supply lines running in places most people couldn't find on a map. She didn't know that 3 years ago I'd been part of the team that saved Fort Blue Ridge from being shut down, protecting thousands of jobs, including some Marcus's father had quietly lobbied to keep. She thought I was just a fat pig in uniform. I kept my face neutral, but inside my mind was running through every possible outcome. The general recognizing me could be good or bad. Good because he owed me a quiet thank you. Bad because Brianna and Marcus would smell money or influence and start digging. They were like that. I'd watched my sister latch on to anyone with a credit line bigger than hers. Now she'd married into a family that could bankroll her worst instincts. A server walked by with a tray of canapes and I took one just to have something to do with my hands. The taste barely registered. My eyes were on General Riley. He was whispering something to Marcus, who nodded and glanced at me. I could read lips well enough to catch Fort Blue Ridge and logistics officer. My heart sped up. If Marcus figured out who I was and what I'd done for his father's base, he'd start wondering about money. He and Brianna always wondered about money. Brianna looped her arm through Marcus's and dragged him toward a group of donors. I stayed near the back of the room, watching, calculating. The string quartet played something soft and expensive sounding. I took another sip of water and reminded myself why I'd come. To be polite, to show support, to avoid drama. But drama had a way of finding me, especially when Brianna was involved. A few guests tried small talk. They asked the usual questions about my job. I gave my standard vague answers. Logistics work. Nothing glamorous. They lost interest quickly. That was how I liked it. The less people knew, the less they could twist. I had nothing to hide, but I'd learned privacy is the best armor when your family treats you like an enemy. From across the room, I caught General Riley looking at me again. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful, like a man trying to solve a puzzle. I wondered if he remembered the night we met in a cramped conference room at Fort Blue Ridge. He'd been fighting budget cuts, desperate to save the base. I'd been the junior officer with the numbers and the plan that kept the gates open. He'd barely noticed me then. Now here we were at his son's wedding, and my sister was calling me a fat pig. Brianna's laughter carried across the room. She was telling some story about how poor Colleen never fit in at parties. People laughed politely. They didn't see the claws behind her smile. I'd spent my whole life being her punching bag, the easy target that made her look better. But this time something was different. The general's eyes on me. The way Marcus's expression had shifted. It was like the air in the room had changed. They weren't laughing with her anymore. They were wondering what they didn't know. I adjusted my pearls and straightened my posture. I wasn't going to give her the show she wanted. Let her think she'd won this round. I'd been underestimated before. It never lasted long. A waiter offered me another drink. I declined, and behind the uniform, the military life and hidden sacrifices, glanced at my watch. The ceremony would start soon. Brianna was posing for photos, Marcus smiling stiffly beside her. General Riley was still standing near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, eyes on me. He didn't look away when I met his gaze. He gave the smallest nod, almost respectful. I nodded back just once. No one else noticed. Brianna was basking in attention, oblivious. Marcus was checking his phone. The guests were laughing, drinking, making small talk, and I stood there in my simple dress, the so-called fat pig, waiting for the next move without showing a single crack. I tightened my grip on the water glass and stepped a little closer to the window, watching the manicured lawn outside Pinterest Manor. My shoulders still held the stiff posture of an officer on duty, even though this was supposed to be a day off. Years in uniform do that to you. They shape how you stand, how you breathe, how you keep your face calm, even when someone's trying to humiliate you in public. 3 days a week, I'm up before dawn on base, running logistics briefings for people who outrank me by decades. We don't have glitzy parties or fancy titles. We have spreadsheets, convoy schedules, and the constant pressure of making sure no one downrange goes without what they need. That's the job. No glamour, no headlines, just making sure a soldier gets a spare part in time so a vehicle rolls instead of stalls. People like Brianna think it's boring. They have no clue how much hinges on the boring stuff. I still remember the first time I walked into Fort Blue Ridge. Back then, it looked like it was on its last legs. Outdated warehouses, broken forklifts, and rumors of a shutdown spreading through the ranks. Civilian employees whispered about layoffs. Families wondered if they should move before the housing market tanked. It wasn't my decision to save the base, but when Maiko asked for volunteers to audit supply lines, I raised my hand. We spent weeks knee-deep in dusty files and bad contracts finding waste no one wanted to admit existed. My late husband Mark used to say I had a bloodhound nose for numbers. He was the one who taught me to dig until the real problem showed up. By the time the task force finished, we'd cut enough overhead to make the base competitive again. Congress kept it open. Thousands of people kept their jobs. General Riley, then a colonel, flew in for the final briefing. He shook a lot of hands that day. I wasn't one of them. Junior officers don't get their names on plaques. We just go back to work. That's the part Brianna never understood. She thinks the military is parades and medals. She doesn't see the weekends spent on call, the deployments that don't make Facebook posts, the endless policy reviews. She saw my pay-ups once and laughed, saying I worked like a mule for a teacher's salary. I didn't bother explaining the satisfaction of a supply mission done right, or a program that saves jobs. She wouldn't hear it. When Mark died in a training accident 6 years ago, the Army gave me the standard death gratuity, $400,000. It was supposed to pay off our mortgage and cover living expenses until I figured things out. I did pay off the mortgage, but instead of sitting on Therest, I invested. Not recklessly, not with insider tips, just careful, boring investments in companies I understood. One of those was a small logistics contractor bidding for work at Fort Blue Ridge. They needed capital to expand. I believed in their model, so I wrote a check. The contractor grew. My investment grew. Nothing illegal, nothing secret. But I never advertised it because the Army takes conflicts of interest seriously. And because I wanted my promotions to be earned, not questioned. My bank statements don't scream rich, they whisper, comfortable. That's how I like it. Now, standing in Brianna's ballroom of a wedding, I felt the old discipline settle over me. Keep your voice level. Keep your hands still. Let the storm blow itself out. That was my training on base and at home. But I also felt something new, a low burn under my ribs. Not anger at the insult I'd heard worse, but at the pattern, the way Brianna always assumed she could knock me down because no one important was looking. This time someone important was looking. I caught General Riley's reflection in the window glass. He was still watching me, and I could tell he wasn't just thinking about a wedding. He was thinking about a base, about supply chains, about a nameless officer who'd done the math and saved his command. He might not know my name yet, but he knew enough to pause. A waiter passed with hors d'oeuvres, and I took one for the cover. My mind ran through procedures the way it does before an inspection. If Brianna and Marcus started sniffing around my finances, what would they find? Tax returns clean, investment records clean, all reported, all above board. You already had copies. Still, being right doesn't stop people from making your life hell. I'd seen officers lose careers over appearances. Brianna laughed across the room, tossing her hair, telling some story about how poor Colleen once came to a family dinner eyeing a uniform because she didn't have real clothes. Guests chuckled politely. I stared out the window at the perfect hedges and thought about pallets of medical supplies moving through Afghan dust. Perspective helps. A hand touched my elbow lightly. It was an older woman, one of the guests, introducing herself family pressure after the wedding, seeds of a revenge story as a cousin of Marcus. She asked if I was really in the army. I said, yes, logistics. She blinked, surprised, then murmured something about, how nice, before walking away. That was the civilian world's reaction. Vague approval, no comprehension. That's fine, I wasn't here to recruit fans. In the distance, Brianna's voice rose again, calling me. Our family's rough around the edges. Hero in a tone that made hero sound like embarrassment. I inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. Mark's old advice echoed in my head. Don't wrestle pigs. You both get dirty and they like it. I smiled to myself at the irony. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from a coworker on base about a supply delivery schedule for Monday. Even off duty, the job followed me. I typed a quick answer, my thumb steady. Work was predictable. Family wasn't. The string quartet shifted to another song. Guests drifted toward their seats for the ceremony. Brianna swept past me with a cloud of perfume, not even looking. Marcus trailed behind, glancing back at me once, expression unreadable. General Riley stayed near the entrance, still watching. I squared my shoulders, finished my water, and stepped toward the seating area. Whatever happened next, I'd handle it the way I always had. One step at a time, no drama, no weakness on display. Years of uniform had taught me that. Years of being Brianna's sister had taught me something else entirely. I left Pinehurst Manor later that evening with my dress still smelling faintly of champagne and perfume. The air outside was cooler than the ballroom had been, sharp enough to clear my head. My boots clicked on the stone walkway as I walked to my car. I didn't look back at the glowing windows of the reception hall. Inside, Brianna was probably still playing the perfect bride. I started the engine, set my phone face down on the seat, and drove away without music. At 6 the next morning, my phone buzzed again. I was sitting at my kitchen table in base housing, coffee mug in one hand, laptop open to a logistics dashboard. The message was from Brianna. Lunch this week. We need to talk about the family future. Marcus wants to be there too. No emojis, no warmth. I read it twice. It wasn't a request. It was a setup. Brianna had always operated like that. A mix of fake sisterly concern and quiet threads. Family future meant money. It always meant money. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Then I set the phone down and focused on my coffee. Let her wait. On the screen, supply numbers scrolled by in neat columns. Trucks, pallets, flight times. Numbers were simple. People were not. My inbox pinged with another message. This one from a colleague forwarding a link to a wedding blog. Brianna had posted pictures already. There I was in the background of a shot with a caption calling me her loyal sister in uniform, my jaw clenched. She was already rewriting the narrative for public consumption, casting herself as the supportive bride and me as the humble sibling. At 9:15 a.m., my doorbell rang. It was a courier with an envelope addressed to me. Inside a glossy invitation to a family financial planning dinner at a private club in downtown Richmond, hosted by Brianna and Marcus Riley RSVP requested. I stared at the heavy cardstock. It wasn't even subtle. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Howard Steele's name flashed on the screen. He'd been my financial advisor since Mark's death, a calm voice who never tried to sell me anything I didn't need. I answered, "Got your text," he said without preamble. "You sure you want to meet them?" "I haven't agreed to anything yet." "You might want to know," he continued. "A firm out of Arlington pulled some of your public filings yesterday. They didn't break any laws, but they're sniffing. Checking on your investments, your shell LLCs, the contractor at Fort Blige. It's all legal, but they're looking for something." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Brianna, I'd bet money on it," Howard said. "Marcus's family has connections. They'll frame it as due diligence. You need to decide whether you want to engage or shut it down. I'm still hoping it's just curiosity. You don't hire a firm like that for curiosity." I thanked him and hung up. The envelope still lay on the table. The embossed letters looked expensive, like everything else Brianna touched. Around noon, another message from her popped up. "Please confirm lunch today. Marcus and I really want to discuss opportunities. Dad-in-law might join." That last sentence said everything. She was dangling the general like bait. I opened a fresh notebook and started a list. Not a dramatic one, just facts, dates of texts, names of firms, the times they'd pulled my filings. Years in the Army had taught me to keep records. By 3:00 p.m., I'd had enough coffee to make a decision. I texted back, "Lunch works. Tomorrow noon." Better to face her than give her room to spin stories. The next morning, as I laced up my running shoes, I thought about Mark. He'd always said my biggest strength was staying calm while someone else lost theirs. "You're like a chess player. The investigation starts. My sister digs into my military past," told me once. "You see 3 moves ahead." He'd meant it as a compliment. On my run around the base perimeter, my mind lined up the facts. Brianna was married into a powerful family, but deep in debt. Marcus had a job title but no real power. Together, they'd found out just enough about my career to suspect there was more behind the curtain, and they were coming for it under the banner of family. Back home, I showered, put on a simple black dress, and drove to the restaurant Brianna had chosen, a high-rise club with valet parking and a view of the river. Inside, everything smelled like money. Polished wood, quiet staff, perfectly folded napkins. Brianna was already there, of course, at a corner table. Marcus sat beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She stood up, air kissed my cheek, and gestured for me to sit. "Colleen, thank you for coming," she said brightly. "We're so excited to talk about our plans for the future." "I bet you are." I kept my tone polite. Marcus cleared his throat. "We think there are some opportunities where we can all benefit. Brianna feels like we should start working together, as a family." Brianna poured herself wine before noon. "You've been so successful, Colleen. We're proud of you. But military pensions aren't what they used to be. You should let us help you manage things, invest together. Marcus has great contacts." I let her talk. Years of briefings had taught me to listen first. She slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some ideas," she said with a sweet smile. "Family trust structures, foundations, things like that. We could really leverage your position." "Oh, my position," she said it like a chess piece. I looked at Marcus. He avoided my eyes. His hand tightened on his glass. "Brianna," I said calmly, "you're making a lot of assumptions." "I'm just thinking ahead," she replied. "You work so hard. You deserve to enjoy your success. We're family. We should share." The words, "we should share," hung between us like smoke. I pushed the folder back toward her. "I'll think about it." Her smile slipped for a second. Then she laughed softly. "Don't take it the wrong way, Colleen. We're just looking out for you." "Of course you are," I said. We finished lunch mostly in silence. She filled the gaps with small talk about honeymoon plans. Marcus stared at his plate. When the check came, she signed it with a flourish. Outside, the sun was bright on the river. I put on my sunglasses and walked to my car without looking back. My phone buzzed again. A message from Howard. "Call me as soon as possible. More movement on the filings. I wave. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and sat for a moment. My hands rested steady on the steering wheel. In my head, the facts kept lining up, neat as supply crates on a dock. Brianna thought she was moving pieces on a board. She didn't realize I'd been trained to see the whole field. The screen on my phone glowed in the dim light of my living room as I dialed Howard. My hands were steady, but my jaw was tight. He picked up on the first ring. "They've stepped it up," he said. "Arlington Asset Research just pulled your public disclosures again, and they're cross-referencing with military contracting data." I clicked a pen and started jotting names and times in my notebook. What exactly are they looking for? "Anything they can spin into a conflict of interest," Howard replied. "It's all public stuff, but they're matching LLC ownership records to contract numbers. They're not amateurs." "They're not," I said. "They're my sister and her husband with someone else's Rolodex." Howard exhaled. "Your paperwork is clean, but perception can be ugly. I'd recommend you make sure your command knows everything before this becomes a headline." I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the notebook. Years of Army paperwork had taught me to be meticulous. Every cent accounted for, every signature dated. Still, I knew how fast rumors spread. I opened my laptop and pulled up my own records. Contractor shares, legal disclosures filed, taxes paid, no secrets, but a determined person could twist anything. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and poured myself another coffee. At noon, I went for a run around the perimeter trail on base. The spring air cut through my lungs, sharp and clean. Running steadied my mind. Each stride gave me another piece of the puzzle. Brianna wanted control. Marcus wanted access. Together, they'd hired a firm to dig into a decorated officer's finances. That wasn't curiosity. That was leverage. Back at my apartment, I showered, pulled on jeans and a plain t-shirt, and sat at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed with a text from Brianna. "Hope lunch yesterday helped. Marcus thinks we should formalize something soon. Dad-in-law is curious about your work." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank email to my commanding officer. Subject line, proactive disclosure. I typed out a concise summary of my investments and attached supporting documents. I explained that I had been defending my honor, reporting to JAG and proving my integrity, made aware of private inquiries into my finances, and wanted to ensure full transparency with JAG. No drama, no excuses, just facts. Years of writing logistics reports had taught me the value of bullet points. When I hit send, a weight shifted off my shoulders. Not relief exactly, just readiness. That evening, Howard sent me a file through Secure Link. "This is what I found so far." His message read. I opened it. Screenshots of Marcus's credit pulls. Brianna's new lines of credit. Emails between them and a law firm specializing in estate disputes. Notes from the PI about my possible hidden assets. They weren't just fishing. They were building a case. I scrolled through the files slowly. My sister's debts were staggering. Maxed out cards, overdue loans, a mortgage underwater on a property she'd bought for investment. Marcus wasn't much better. High-end cars leased under shell companies, business ventures failing quietly. Their lifestyle had been smoke and mirrors for years. My pen moved across the notebook as I wrote down the key points. Not to use as a weapon, but as a shield. If Brianna dragged my name through the mud, I needed proof of her motive. The next morning on base, I dropped by the JAG office. The captain on duty raised his eyebrows when I handed him my packet. "You're ahead of the game," he said. "I'd rather you hear it from me than from a blogger," I answered. He flipped through the papers quickly. "Looks fine, we'll log it." I thanked him and left. The sun glinted off rows of Humvees parked on the lot. Soldiers moved in practice patterns, loading gear, checking manifests. It was a rhythm I knew by heart. Reliable, predictable, not like family. On the drive back, my phone rang. Howard again. "One more thing," he said. "The PI they hired isn't just a paper pusher. It's a former military investigator. They're serious." "Good," I said. "That means their bills will pile up faster." Howard chuckled softly. "Just keep records of every interaction. And Colleen, don't let them bait you." I hung up thinking of Brianna's smile at lunch. She'd always been sure she could control me. She had no idea what 15 years of deployments and audits had done to my patience. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table with stacks of files spread out. Contracts, emails, bank statements. Mark's photo sat on the corner of the table. I touched the frame once before going back to my notes. He taught me to be methodical. It had saved me before. It would save me again. The television murmured in the background with local news. A reporter mentioned defense budget hearings. I muted it. My eyes scanned another page of the PI's notes. Subject appears to maintain modest lifestyle inconsistent with possible asset growth. The words were meant as suspicion but read like a compliment. My phone vibrated again. This time a message from Marcus. We're worried about you. Let's meet for dinner soon. Worried about me? Right. I put the phone face down and went back to highlighting numbers. My kitchen smelled of coffee and ink. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Hours later, when it finally stood up to stretch, the table looked like an operations center. Color-coded tabs, timelines, names. I wasn't planning an attack. I was building clarity. In logistics, clarity wins. As I rinsed my coffee mug, my phone buzzed one last time with an alert from my email. A reply from my commanding officer. Received. Thank you for the proactive transparency. Short, professional, exactly what I wanted. I set the mug in the rack and wiped my hands on a towel. Through the window, the base lights blinked in the distance like a small city. Somewhere out there, trucks were moving because I'd planned their routes. Somewhere in town, my sister was planning hers. I pulled my hair back into a bun, tied it tight, and opened my laptop again. The cursor blinked on an empty page of notes. My fingers hovered over the keys, then began typing out a new header. Contingency plan. It was a habit from deployments. Prepare before you're forced to react. The room was quiet, except for the soft clicking of the keyboard. My breathing stayed steady in my mind. The wedding hall with its chandeliers faded, replaced by rows of shipping containers and spreadsheets. Different worlds, same skill set. Keep track, stay calm, be ready. I closed one file and opened another. Building a timeline of every interaction since Brianna's wedding. Dates, names, and next steps lined up neatly. No drama, no panic, just order where others brought chaos. My phone buzzed yet again, a low vibration against the tabletop. I let it buzz until it stopped and returned to the keyboard. The next morning began before sunrise, the way most of my missions had. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, tied my boots, and tucked the flash drive with all my notes into my uniform pocket. The base was still half asleep when I drove through the gate, headlights catching glimpses of soldiers jogging in formation. Everything about that scene, discipline, order, forward movement, reminded me why I loved the Army and why I was determined to protect my name. At JAG headquarters, the duty sergeant ushered me straight to Captain Ramirez's office. I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were notarized lunch showdown. My sister's threat turns into a family revenge. Plot statements of my investments. Conflict of interest disclosures, and a cover letter summarizing the harassment I was receiving from my sister and her husband. I'd spent the previous night refining it to a single page of bullet points. No emotion, just facts. Ramirez flipped through it quickly. You've been thorough, he said. This isn't even close to a violation. We'll log everything, notify the Inspector General, and put it in your personnel file. If anyone tries to use this against you, we'll already have a record. That's all I want, I said. His expression softened. I've seen plenty of officers panic when family money and government work collide. You're handling it like an ops plan, smart. I nodded once. Praise wasn't my goal. A clean record was. When I left his office, a text from Howard waited on my phone. We need to talk in person. He never wrote that unless he'd found something big. We met at a diner off post, the kind with bottomless coffee and laminated menus. He slid into the booth across from me, laptop under his arm, and opened it without preamble. Colleen, your sister's financial situation isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. He turned the screen toward me. Graphs, statements, and screenshots filled the display. Look at this, he said, tapping each column. Multiple mortgages, 3 business loans, Marcus guaranteed personally, revolving credit maxed out. They're one missed payment away from defaulting on everything. I studied the numbers. Years of logistics had taught me to read patterns at a glance. They've been living like this for how long? Since before your promotion, Howard said. I traced Marcus's LLCs. Most are shells. He's been pitching failed tech startups to investors while covering losses with new credit lines. Brianna's been co-signing. I pushed my coffee aside. And now they're aiming at me to fill the hole. He gave a grim nod. Hiring that investigator wasn't cheap either. They're betting they can force a payout. I leaned back against the vinyl seat. The hum of conversation around us faded as I considered my next move. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about survival for them and for me if they dragged me down with them. Howard closed the laptop. I can get affidavit from credit agencies confirming the debt. I can also document the PI's contract. If this turns into a formal complaint, it'll show clear motive. Do it, I said, and send a summary to Captain Ramirez. I want Jag to see exactly who's trying to smear me. He smiled faintly. You always did like a paper trail. Paper trails save lives, I replied, and careers. When I got back to my apartment, I spread Howard's printouts across my dining table. Debt totals, overdue notices, private investigator invoices. It was all there, black and white. I highlighted key points and filed them neatly. Each page felt like another layer of armor. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Brianna Colleen. We really need to sit down again. Things are complicated and Marcus has some ideas about how we can all work together. Her tone was sugar over steel. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my secure email and sent Captain Ramirez an update, attached summary of my sister's financial position and evidence of harassment. I ended the email with a single line. I remained fully transparent and cooperative. By late afternoon, I drove to the base gym to clear my head. Deadlifts, squats, and pull-ups, simple movements that demanded focus. My muscles burned, but my mind sharpened. When you're under investigation, panic is a luxury you can't afford. After showering, I walked to the PX for groceries. At the checkout, a young private recognized me from a logistics seminar I taught. Ma'am, you're the one who figured out the fuel routing problem in Kuwait, right? He asked. I gave a small smile. That was a team effort, I said. But his question reminded me why my reputation mattered. Years of clean, hard work could be undone by one family member's greed if I wasn't careful. Back at home, the sun was setting over the training fields beyond my window. I poured a glass of water and sat down again at the table. My files were lined up like troops, ready for inspection. I added one more tab to my binder. Countermeasures. Under that header, I wrote in block letters. Full disclosure to command completed. Evidence of sister's debt documented. PI contract confirmed. Next, prepare a personal statement. Then I stared at the blank space under next. My pen hovered for a moment before writing, set boundaries. The room was quiet, except for the soft tick of the wall clock. I thought about Brianna's face at the wedding, triumphant when she thought she'd humiliated me. I thought about Marcus's polite smile hiding calculation. I'd spent my adult life keeping supply lines open under fire. This was just another kind of battlefield. My phone buzzed again. A new email from Captain Ramirez, received. Will include in file. Recommend you avoid direct contact until we advise. Good. That's exactly what it planned. I stood up, stretched, and opened my balcony door. The evening air smelled of cut grass and diesel. In the distance, trucks rumbled across the motor pool. Life on base went on orderly planning. My countermove, protecting my military career and reputation, and efficient. Inside my dining table looked like the command post of a small war. Folders, tabs, highlighted printouts, but there was no drama here. No panic, just preparation. I closed the balcony door, locked it, and returned to the table. My eyes moved over the debt totals one more time, committing them to memory. Then I slid the files into a locking briefcase and set it by the door. The briefcase clicked shut with a sound that felt final, but not finished. Not a line drawn in the sand, just another box checked on the plan. I picked up my empty coffee mug, washed it, and set it upside down on the drying rack. Outside the window, the sky deepened to navy, and the base lights flickered on one by one like small, steady beacons. My breathing matched their rhythm, calm, deliberate, steady. Nothing about the moment looked dramatic from the outside, just a soldier finishing paperwork at her kitchen table. But every detail, the files, the disclosures, the binder, was part of the same quiet move, taking control before someone else tried to. And as the clock ticked forward, the only sound in the room was the faint buzz of the refrigerator, steady as a heartbeat, while my plans settled into place, piece by piece. Sliding the locking briefcase under my arm, I left my apartment the next day, dressed in a simple black sheath dress and a pair of low heels. It was deliberate. No uniform, no insignia, nothing Brianna could twist into an image of arrogance. The restaurant she picked was the same high-end spot she'd used for our last family lunch. This time, though, I arrived early enough to watch the setup. The host led me to a window table with a panoramic view of downtown. Crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting, and the menu prices could have funded a squad's training weekend. I set my briefcase down beside my chair and ordered water. No wine, no distractions. At 11:55 sharp, Brianna and Marcus appeared at the entrance. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car. Marcus, in a navy blazer, carried himself like a man trying to look in control. They approached with bright smiles that didn't reach their ears. "Colleen," Brianna said, leaning in for a perfunctory cheek air kiss. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "We Saturday." A server poured wine into Brianna's and Marcus's glasses. They didn't offer me any, which was fine by me. Brianna opened the menu with a practice flick of her manicured fingers. "I took the liberty of ordering the Bordeaux again," she said. I nodded once. "Water's fine." Marcus smiled tightly. "We wanted to clear the air. Family is important after all." Brianna placed the menu aside and leaned slightly forward. "Colleen, I've been thinking about our situation. We're at a point where transparency benefits everyone." I sipped my water. "Go on." Her tone stayed sweet, but her words sharpened. "Dad always respected people who understood business. And Mark is here. He's been very successful advising families with complex assets. We thought we could help you structure things better, protect yourself, maybe even use some of your connections for defense contracts." Marcus chimed in. "We're talking about how and when. Your investments could open doors, and our expertise could streamline everything. We'd all benefit." I set my glass down carefully. "My finances are already structured," I said. "And I don't mix personal family ties with Army contracts?" Brianna's smile tightened. "That's admirable, but you've been discreet. Some might find that secrecy troubling, especially given your position. The Army takes conflicts of interest very seriously, doesn't it?" There it was. The threat dressed up as concern. "Yes," I said calmly. "That's why JAG has a full file of my disclosures. My command is aware of everything." End of chap. For the first time, Marcus's confident mask slipped. He glanced at Brianna. She blinked twice, then reached for her wine glass. "Well," she said brightly, "I'm glad you're prepared. We just want what's best for everyone." "I'm sure you do," I replied. The server arrived with appetizers. None of us reached for them. The tension across the table was thick enough to cut. Brianna tried again. "Colleen, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We're family. We could build something big together. A foundation, a trust, whatever you want. Imagine the good we could do." I leaned in slightly, matching her tone. "Brianna, you called me a fat pig at your wedding in front of 300 people. Then you hired someone to investigate me. That's not family. That's a business move." Her face froze. Marcus cleared his throat. Emotions were high at the wedding. "Let's not dwell." "I'm not dwelling." I cut in softly. "I'm clarifying that." Brianna placed her wine glass down with a faint clink. "We've done our homework, Colleen. You've been investing for years. You've built a portfolio most people can't imagine, and you've done it under the radar. That's impressive. But privacy is fragile. If people start asking questions, they might not like the answers they find. Then it's lucky for me those answers are all public record." I said, "You're right. I've been careful because being careful is what keeps official confrontation. JAG hearing turns the family drama. Upside-down soldiers alive, what keeps missions funded and what keeps families from imploding. But if you're implying blackmail, don't. It won't work." Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Brianna tried a soft attack. "Colleen, think of Dylan. He deserves stability." "We all do. Dylan's stability doesn't come from me." I said, "It comes from his own work, and he's smart enough to see when someone's using him." Brianna's eyes flashed just for a second. Then she forced another smile. We're simply offering help. You could make a contribution to a family trust. In return, we'd handle the public side. You'd keep your privacy. We'd all win. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not contributing a dime to anything you or Marcus control. The silence that followed was sharp. A server came to refill our water and wine. Even he seemed to sense the tension. Brianna tried one last angle. You've always been the big sister, Colleen. You've always thought you were the smartest, but you're not untouchable. I tilted my head. Neither are you. Marcus raised a hand slightly. Maybe we should cool down. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thin folder and laid it on the table. This, I said, is a copy of the evidence I've already given to Jag. Your debts, your PI contract, your communications with a law firm specializing in estate disputes, everything. Brianna's face drained of color. Marcus stiffened. I continued in the same calm tone. You're right about one thing. Transparency benefits everyone. That's why my command knows everything about my finances. If you choose to continue your little investigation, you'll be explaining to federal authorities why you've been misrepresenting my assets and hiring investigators to dig into a serving officer's private life. Do you really want that? Marcus's eyes flicked to Brianna. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. We just wanted a conversation, she said, her voice lower now. And we're having one, I said. Here's my offer. Stop the digging. Stop the veiled threats and focus on your own finances. Otherwise, you'll be facing not me, but Army legal and federal law enforcement. The restaurant was quiet around us. Even the background music seemed to fade. Brianna swallowed hard, forced a smile, and said, We'll think about it. Good, I replied. I closed the folder, slipped it back into my briefcase, and stood up. My chair scraped softly against the polished wood floor. Lunch was lovely, I said. Neither of them moved. I left cash on the table for my water habit from deployments. Pay your part, leave clean, and walked out into the bright midday Sunday. The air smelled of exhaust and city sidewalks. My heels clicked steadily as I crossed the street to my car. Sliding behind the wheel, I took a deep breath. No tremor, no adrenaline spike, just clarity. The briefcase sat on the passenger seat like a silent witness. I started the engine and drove off, merging into the flow of traffic. The city passed by in flashes of brick buildings, bus stops, and people on lunch breaks. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with another message. I didn't check it. At the next red light, I adjusted the mirror and caught my own eyes. Steady, focused. This wasn't a scene from some drama. It was just a soldier applying the same discipline she used on deployments to the mess her family had created. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator, the engine humming smoothly as the city blocks rolled past. The briefcase stayed closed, my hand stayed firm on the wheel, and the road stretched ahead like any other route I'd planned. Each turn already mapped out in my head. Back in my apartment, I set the briefcase on the dining table and opened the balcony door to let in fresh air. The city noise drifted up in fragments traffic, a dog barking, a bus squealing to a stop. It felt grounding. I loosened my hair, rolled up my sleeves, and pulled the binder of notes toward me. Everything from the lunch was still fresh. Brianna's forced smile, Marcus's twitchy hands, the glint in her eyes when she said, "Untouchable." End quote. I plugged in my laptop and opened a blank document titled Response Plan. Old habits from deployments kicked in automatically. Header objective. Below it, I typed neutralize harassment, maintain legal compliance, preserve reputation. Under resources, I listed Howard's documentation, JAG file, financial records. Under risks, I wrote public perception, command distraction, Dylan's involvement. A faint buzz from my phone signaled an incoming email. It was from Captain Ramirez. Reviewed your latest update. We flagged the situation internally. Our advice? No direct contact without counsel present. That line without counsel present was all I needed to confirm this wasn't just a family spat anymore. I texted Howard. Need a meeting tomorrow morning. Bring everything. Then I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter staring out the window. The base sat beyond the city like a steady anchor, its trucks and barracks in neat rows. The contrast to Brianna's chaos sharpened my resolve. At dawn, Howard arrived carrying a heavy messenger bag. The honor ultimatum. stopping my sister's attacks. The legal way, he dropped it on my table and began laying out files like a dealer spreading cards. "I've got a full picture now," he said. "Debts, shell companies, their investigators' background, and one more thing. You're going to like this." He handed me a sheet showing the PI's contract retainer. It was triple the going rate. "They're bleeding money to dig on you," he said. "If you do nothing, they'll implode under their own weight." "I'm not built to do nothing," I answered. "Then let's go on offense," Howard said. "Not in the tabloids, but in court filings, preemptive injunctions. You're a serving officer. Harassment of a federal employee has teeth." I sat down scanning the list of legal tools. My AS caught on. "Cease and desist plus defamation hold." "Will that stop them?" I asked. "It forces them to either back off or go public," Howard explained. "And if they go public, we're already ahead with JAG and the Inspector General. We frame it as protecting national security from frivolous claims." I nodded slowly. "Draft it." Howard pulled out his laptop and started typing. The clack of keys filled the room like a subdued drum beat. I took another folder and began marking exhibits. Brianna's messages, Marcus's credit lines, the PI's invoices. Each one would be attached to the filing. By mid-morning, the table looked like a war map again. Colored tabs, legal drafts, timestamps. I checked my watch. On base, soldiers would be finishing PT and heading to breakfast. My body still ran on that clock. Howard glanced up. "You're calm." "Logistics," I said. "You plan supply convoys through hostile territory long enough. You stopped flinching at potholes." He grinned faintly. "Remind me not to play poker with you." When he left, I changed into running clothes and hit the trail. The cool air burned my lungs but cleared my head. Each stride felt like sorting one more thought. The plan was simple: full legal disclosure, documented harassment, and preemptive action. No outbursts, no leaks, quiet, methodical pressure. Back home, sweat still drying, I showered and then called Captain Ramirez. He answered on the second ring. "Captain, this is Major Ward. My counsel is drafting a cease and desist. I'll send you a copy for your file." "Good move," he said. "Well, note it." His steady tone matched mine. I hung up, feeling the gears click into place. That afternoon, Dylan texted me. "Jessica says you threatened her at lunch." "What's going on?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "No threats, just facts." "You're welcome to read what I filed with JAG." No reply came. I turned back to the table. Howard's draft email arrived with the subject line, "Initial letter." I opened it. The text was crisp, formal, unambiguous. It cited harassment of a federal employee, intentional misrepresentation of assets, and attempts at coercion. It gave Brianna and Marcus 72 hours to withdraw their inquiries and confirm in writing they would cease all such activity. I read it twice, made one minor edit, and hit approve. Howard would send it from his office under his letterhead, clean, professional, and fully documented. Evening settled in. I reheated leftover pasta, ate standing at the counter, and then returned to my notes. Under next steps, I wrote 1, monitor for response. 2, if non-compliant, escalate to injunction. 3, maintain operational tempo. A knock at the door startled me. It was my neighbor, Sergeant First Class Morales, holding a package. "This got dropped at my place," he said. I thanked him, took the envelope, and closed the door. Inside was a glossy brochure for a family wealth summit scheduled for next month. Marcus listed as a speaker. I almost laughed, even under pressure. He was still hustling. I slipped the brochure into my binder as Exhibit 23. Every scrap of evidence could matter. Later that night, I stepped onto the balcony. The base lights glowed steady in the distance. My phone vibrated with another message, but I let it sit. My breathing matched the slow rhythm of trucks moving on the highway below. On the table behind me, Howard's draft letter waited to be sent. My binder lay open to the countermeasures tab. Each exhibit lined up like a neat row of supplies. The smell of coffee lingered from the afternoon pot. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in fatigue, but in focus. In the Army, you learn to live between crises, to prepare in the quiet stretches so you're ready when the noise comes. This was no different. When I stepped back inside, I shut the balcony door, sat at the table, and pulled the binder close. My pen moved across a fresh page, making a new list. Potential witnesses: Howard, Captain Ramirez, financial officers. Another list: potential triggers. Media leak. Regulatory inquiry. Dylan's involvement. No panic. No drama, just planning. The same skill set that had saved convoys in Iraq and budgets in the Pentagon was now aimed at a different battlefield. My own family's greed. I set the pen down, took Fallout and New Path, turning a family revenge story into opportunity. A slow breath, and looked at the rows of evidence. Each page was another step toward control. Not revenge for its own sake. Control, order, and a clean record. Outside the window, a bus hissed to a stop and then rolled on. The refrigerator hummed softly. My hand rested on the binder's cover. I didn't feel like a cornered target. I felt like a soldier setting up a perimeter quietly, precisely before anyone realized the lines had already been drawn. And as the night deepened, that quiet perimeter held each piece of paper a stake in the ground, each plan a route out of chaos, the rhythm of discipline steady under my fingertips. The morning of the scheduled meeting dawned crisp and bright. I was up before my alarm, ironing my dress uniform with the same precision I used for inspection day. My medals caught the sunlight as I pinned them on, a reminder of every operation I'd completed without compromise. Today wasn't a combat mission, but the stakes felt similar. I arrived at the JAG conference room 15 minutes early. Captain Ramirez and Howard were already there, seated at a long, polished table. Howard's laptop glowed, files neatly stacked beside it. Ramirez gave me a nod. "Well, keep this formal but straightforward," he said. "Good," I replied, setting my briefcase down. Through the glass wall, I could see the hallway beyond civilian shoes, stepping nervously, muted voices. Then, Brianna appeared, flanked by Marcus and their attorney, a slick man in a dark gray suit, who introduced himself as Daniel Price. His handshake was firm but perfunctor. Brianna tried for poise, but her eyes darted around the room. Marcus looked as though he'd aged 5 years since our last lunch. "We all Saturday Ramirez opened the session. We're here, to address concerns raised about Major Ward's financial activities and to clarify any misunderstandings regarding her role as an officer of the United States Army." Price launched in first. "My clients have come across information suggesting Major Ward may have undisclosed financial interests that pose a potential conflict of interest with her military duties. They've made inquiries in good faith to protect their family's integrity." Alu Howard slid a folder across the table toward Ramirez, who opened it and glanced at the contents. "Major Ward has provided full disclosure of her investments to this office and to the Inspector General." Ramirez said, "Her activities are entirely lawful and documented. What concerns us are the actions of your clients, which may constitute harassment of a federal employee." Brianna's composure cracked slightly. She folded her hands but couldn't keep them still. Marcus cleared his throat. "We're simply asking for transparency," Howard spoke calmly. "Transparency isn't obtained through private investigators and anonymous legal probes. Here's documentation of the PI contract your client signed, including payment schedules." He pushed another folder across the table. Price glanced at the pages, his confident rhythm slowing. "Regardless," he said, "my clients are entitled to raise questions about family assets." I finally spoke. Raising questions is one thing. Hiring a firm to dig through my life and feeding rumors to regulators is another. You've crossed the line from curiosity to coercion. Brianna's eyes flicked up to mine, then back down. Marcus shifted in his seat. Ramirez leaned forward. "Major Ward has been proactive in documenting these events. We're prepared to forward evidence to federal authorities if this harassment continues. I advise your clients to consider their next steps carefully." That Price opened his mouth, but Brianna interrupted, her voice a little too sharp. "We're not harassing anyone. We're just trying to ensure our family isn't blindsided." I looked directly at her. "You blindsided me at your wedding in front of 300 people. You've been building a case behind my back. If you were worried, you could have asked me directly. Instead, you chose threats dressed as concern." Silence spread across the table. Ramirez folded his hands. "Major Ward, do you have any additional documentation for the record?" "Yes." I opened my briefcase and laid out 3 color-coded binders. "This contains every disclosure, tax filing, and contract I've signed in the last 10 years. It also contains a summary of my sister and brother-in-law's outstanding debts, which establishes motive for their actions. Price's eyebrows shot up. That's irrelevant. It's directly relevant, Howard cut in smoothly. If your clients plan to make formal complaints, motive will be examined. Brianna's face palled. Marcus's jaw clenched. The weight of the paper between us felt heavier than any weapon. I continued my voice level. I've built my career on transparency and discipline. I won't allow either of you to use my service as leverage for your debts. This is your notice. Stop the investigations, withdraw any pending complaints, and stay out of my affairs. End of Price turned to his clients, murmuring urgently. Brianna whispered back, her knuckles white. Marcus stared at the table. Ramirez's voice cut through the tension. Major Ward, your disclosures are complete and sufficient. This office finds no evidence of misconduct. Unless your relatives have new, credible information, this matter is closed from our end. I sat back slightly, hands still folded. I didn't feel triumph, just clarity. Howard leaned closer and spoke quietly but firmly. We're prepared to file an injunction if necessary, but we'd rather healing and moving on, from family drama to military legacy, resolve this now. Price looked at Brianna. You need to decide, he whispered audibly enough for the room to hear. Brianna swallowed, her eyes flicking to me. We only wanted to protect the family, she said weakly. You protect family by telling the truth, I answered. Marcus shifted his voice. What if we withdraw everything? Howard responded. Then this ends here. No more PIs. No more legal fishing expeditions. You focus on your finances. She focuses on her career. Price nodded slowly. That's advisable. Brianna let out a shaky breath. Fine, we'll withdraw. I didn't smile. I simply gathered my binders. Good. I said. Ramirez stood. We'll note that on the record. If anything changes, Major Ward will be informed. The meeting concluded with a rustle of papers and the scrape of chairs. Brianna rose stiffly, her designer suit suddenly looking like armor that didn't fit. Marcus avoided my gaze. Price collected his folders quickly, muttering something about paperwork. I shook Ramirez's hand. Thank you, I said. Stay the course, Major, he replied. Howard and I walked out together into the corridor. Textbook, he said quietly. Textbook doesn't always mean over. I replied, my voice even. He gave me a sidelong glance but didn't press. Outside the sunlight was bright but cool. I paused at the top of the steps, inhaling slowly. Soldiers crossed the courtyard in uniform, their movements crisp and unhurried. Life went on. Howard handed me a slim envelope. Copy of everything for your files? He said. I slipped it into my briefcase. Thanks. You sure you're okay? He asked. I met his eyes. I'm steady. We parted ways. I walked to my car, heels clicking against the concrete, briefcase balanced easily in my hand. At the vehicle, I paused and looked back once at the JAG building. Its stone facade was impersonal, but today it had felt like a shield. Sliding into the driver's seat, I set the briefcase on the passenger side. The engine started with a smooth purr. Traffic moved slowly out of the parking lot. A line of cars heading toward the base gates. As I emerged into the flow, my mind ticked through the planned documents filed. Disclosures made, lines drawn, no drama, no shouting, just order. Exactly how I wanted it. I stopped at a red light. Outside the window, a group of young soldiers waited at a crosswalk, laughing at something on a phone. I wondered if any of them had yet learned how messy family could be. The light turned green. I drove on, the hum of the tires steady under my hands, the briefcase locked shut beside me. The road ahead was clear, just another route on the map, and my breathing matched the quiet rhythm of forward motion. The next morning started with a quiet knock on my door. I'd been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, scanning emails from JAG confirming the withdrawal of Brianna and Marcus's complaints. Howard's cease and desist letter had worked. Now it was up to me to set the final boundary. When I opened the door, Dylan stood there. His share was mussed from lack of sleep, his jaw tense. We need to talk, he said. Ace stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. He paced, just like when he was a kid cramming for finals. Jessica, Brianna, whatever. She's furious. She says you humiliated her in that meeting. I stayed seated. I defended myself. He stopped pacing and stared at me. She's still my sister and you're still my brother, I said evenly. That's why we're having this conversation before things get uglier. He ran a hand through his hair. She thinks you're trying to destroy her. Azer, I'm not trying to destroy anyone, I replied. I'm protecting what I've built and the integrity of my uniform. He exhaled hard, then dropped into the chair opposite me. What do you want from her? Nothing, I said, except for her to stop. No more investigators, no more veiled threats, no more manipulation. If she stops, this ends quietly. Dylan pressed his palms to his eyes, then looked at me. She's terrified. They're drowning in debt. Colleen, she thought you'd bail her out. And two, I nodded once. I know, he blinked. You know, I've seen the records. Howard traced everything. Their debts, their PI contract, I had to. She turned this into a legal matter. Dylan's shoulders slumped. She'll never forgive you for this. Forgiveness isn't my goal, I said quietly. Clarity is, he stared at the table. What if she apologizes? An apology doesn't erase what she's done, I said. It might change how we move forward, but the boundaries stay. 1. Silence settled between us, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Finally, Dylan stood. I'll tell her. Tell her one more thing, I said. If she keeps pushing, she won't just be facing me. She'll be facing federal charges for harassment. This isn't a bluff. His eyes searched mine. You've really changed. No, I said. I've just stopped pretending my patience is infinite. He left without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, the cool wood steadying me. Then I went back to the table, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. Final boundary. Underneath, I wrote bullet points. No further contact unless through counsel, no financial involvement, all interactions documented. I closed the notebook and set it aside. Later that afternoon, Brianna herself showed up unannounced. She didn't knock so much as pound. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, blocking her from coming in. She wore oversized sunglasses and a tailored coat, but the effect was brittle. We need to talk, she said. We're talking, I replied. She glanced around the hallway, lowered her voice. You're going to ruin me. No, Brianna, you're doing that to yourself. I'm just refusing to be your safety net. Her mouth tightened. You think you're sonable, hiding behind your uniform. But you're not untouchable, I says. I don't need to be untouchable, I said calmly. I just need to be honest and documented, which I am. She took a step closer. If you don't help me, Marcus will lose everything. We'll lose the house. Dylan will never forgive you. Marcus made his choices. You made yours. Dylan's an adult. He can decide who he forgives. But I'm done being leveraged. Brianna's sunglasses slipped down a little, revealing eyes rimmed red. I called you a fat pig because I was angry. I thought you were a nobody living off Dad's pension. Then I found out you were rich and it made me furious. You think you're better than us. I let the words hang for a moment. I don't think I'm better. I think I worked differently and I think you tried to punish me for it. She looked away. We're family. Family isn't blackmail, I said. Family isn't hiring investigators to dig into a soldier's finances. Her lip trembled. What do you want me to do? I took a slow breath. Withdraw everything. Stop the investigations. Pay your debts however you can. Live your own life and stay out of mine. Her hands clenched at her sides. And if I don't, I kept my voice level. Then the evidence goes to federal law enforcement and you'll be answering to them, not me. That's the last time I'll say it. Brianna stared at me, her face a mask of anger and desperation. Then she spun on her heel and walked down the hallway, heels clicking sharply until the sound faded. I closed the door gently, not slamming it, and went back to my kitchen. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I poured it out, rinsed the mug, and set it upside down on the drying rack. The ordinary motion steadied my breathing. My phone buzzed, a message from Howard. Got confirmation from Jag. Withdrawal filed. Everything documented. I typed back. Good. Thank you. Then I walked to my small balcony. The evening light painted the base in muted gold. Trucks moving like clockwork on distant roads. I stood there with my hands on the railing, not thinking about revenge or victory. Just about order restored. Inside, my briefcase sat closed on the table. Next to it, the notebook page with final boundary written at the top. My handwriting looked firm, decisive. I turned off my phone, poured fresh coffee, and sat down again. The quiet felt heavy but clean. No shouting, no threats, no panic. Just a line drawn and held. As I took the first sip, a faint breeze drifted through the open balcony door. Papers on the table fluttered, but stayed in place under the weight of a pen. My breathing matched that steady rhythm. Each inhale measured, each exhale deliberate. Across the room, the clock ticked forward. Nothing dramatic happened. No calls, no knocks, no surprises. Just a soldier at their kitchen table, holding her ground with the same discipline she'd brought to every convoy, every briefing, every long night overseas. I glanced once at the closed door, then back at my notes. The perimeter was set. The facts were documented. And the quiet inside my apartment wasn't emptiness. It was space to think, space to move, space to keep living on my own terms. A week later, the sound of boots on gravel outside my building signaled the mail delivery. I opened the door to find an envelope from the county courthouse final paperwork, confirming the withdrawal of all complaints and the closing of any preliminary inquiries tied to my name. I signed for it, thanked the carrier, and stood in the doorway for a moment, the crisp envelope in my hand. It wasn't victory so much as closure. I went back inside and placed the document on my kitchen table beside my now familiar binder. The binder felt less like armor now, more like an archive. The tension in my shoulders had eased, replaced by a steady focus on what came next. My phone buzzed. It was Dylan. "I moved out of Marcus and Brianna's place," he said quietly. "I needed some space." "I'm glad you did," I replied. "She's angry," he said. "But maybe she's realizing what she's done." I didn't answer right away. "Finally," I said, "you have to decide what kind of family you want to build from here." He exhaled. "I've been thinking about that a lot. I didn't marry into money. I wanted a partner, but I ignored the signs. We all ignore signs when we want something to work." I said, "What matters is what you do now." He wasn't for a moment, then said, "I'm putting in for a transfer to the Denver office. I need a fresh start." "That sounds like a good move," I said. We hung up. I looked out the window at the base in the distance, its orderly grid of roads and buildings, and thought about my own next move. For years, I'd been stationed in the same region, turning down offers to transfer because it felt like stability. Now, with the mess of my sister's drama behind me, I felt an opening. That afternoon, I visited Colonel Jennings, my commanding officer. His office was lined with framed maps from previous deployments. He gestured for me to sit. "I've read the JAG file," he said. "You handled yourself well. Not everyone would have kept it this clean." "Thank you, sir," I said. He leaned back. "I heard you're considering a transfer." I said. Colorado Springs Logistics Command posted an opening. Ward Initiative scholarships could be run from there. He smiled faintly. "I think you'd be perfect for it." I left his office feeling a quiet resolve. It wasn't running away. It was choosing my next post, just like planning the next supply route. Back at my apartment, I pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the page, "Ward Initiative Draft Plan." The idea had started as a sketch on a napkin months earlier, a scholarship fund for military families named after my father. Now, it felt urgent, not as a reaction to Brianna, but as a step towards something constructive. I listed bullet points: scholarships for children of enlisted personnel, training grants for spouses to re-enter the workforce, transparent accounting published annually. I underlined that last point twice. Transparency had been my shield. Now it would be part of the program's DNA. The next few days were a blur of planning. I met with base finance officers about setting up the nonprofit legally. I called Howard to draw up trust documents that no one could manipulate. He seemed genuinely pleased to be working on something positive. "This is you moving from defense to offense," he said over the phone. "Not offense," I replied. "Construction." Oh, evenings I still ran on the trail. The rhythm of my steps matching the rhythm of my thoughts. No wine, no late nights, just steady planning. One night, Dylan called again. His voice sounded lighter. "I found an apartment downtown," he said. "It's small, but it's mine. And I've been volunteering at a youth center after work." Feels good. I smiled into the phone. Sounds like you're building something too. I think I needed to see what real integrity looked like, he said quietly. Thanks, Colleen. After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. For all the chaos, something solid had emerged. Dylan finding his own footing. Me shaping my next chapter? I began spending weekends in Colorado Springs, scouting neighborhoods. The air was thinner, the mountains rising sharp against the sky. Fewer people knew me there. I could go to a cafe in jeans and a sweatshirt and just be another face. One Saturday, I met with a retired sergeant who ran a small charity for veterans. We sat in a diner with chipped mugs and vinyl booze, and he told me about kids who couldn't afford college, even with GI Bill benefits. I took notes, asked questions, and by the end of the meal, I had a stack of names and numbers for potential partners. Driving back, I felt a steady calm, no excitement, something sturdier, purpose. At night, in my apartment, I began drafting the Ward Initiative's mission statement. No flowery language, just clear goals. We support military families who support the mission. Simple, measurable, transparent. The last vestiges of Brianna's chaos still popped up in small ways. Occasional emails from her attorney with vague questions, rumors on social media about hidden fortunes, but they no longer felt like threats. Jog had the file, Howard had the evidence, and I had drawn the line. One evening, I received a brief text from Brianna herself. We're done. No apology. No explanation, just that. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. The following morning, I packed boxes of personal items from my office, framed commendations, photos from deployments, a coffee mug Dylan had given me years ago. The move to Colorado Springs was official now. As I taped the last box, I felt nostalgia, only readiness. This base had been my anchor, but it was time for a new assignment. One I chose, not one forced by family crisis. That evening, I invited a few close colleagues to my apartment. We ate takeout on paper plates, laughed about old field exercises, and swapped stories about supply chain disasters narrowly avoided. No one mentioned Brianna. After they left, I washed the dishes, wiped down the counters, and sat at the table with my binder one last time. It no longer looked like a battle plan. It looked like history, a record of how discipline, documentation, and calm had held when everything else tried to spin out of control. I closed it, placed it in a box marked personal, and sealed the lid. Through the window, the city lights glowed, trucks rumbled in the distance. My breathing matched that steady sound, calm and deliberate. On the counter, my new notebook lay open to a page titled Ward Initiative, Next Steps. Underneath, I'd written, Launch first scholarships by fall semester. Partner with veteran-run charities. Build transparent website. I underlined the last point once more. Then I set down my pen, closed the notebook, and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the clock. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy, just a soldier at her kitchen table planning a new mission. One entirely her own, and as the night settled, that plan felt as steady as any convoy route I'd ever mapped. Each line of ink a path forward, each detail a promise that my next chapter would be defined, not by retaliation, but by the discipline to build something better out of the wreckage left behind. Moving day arrived under a pale blue sky strewn with early clouds. My apartment was already stripped to essentials boxes labeled in neat black marker, duffel bag zipped and ready by the door. I walked through each room one last time, turning off lights, checking windows. Nothing left undone. The place that had been my command post through months of family chaos now stood bare and quiet like a clean page. The moving truck rumbled up right on time. 2 uniformed movers shook my hand politely and began carrying out the boxes. I watched them load my life into the truck piece by piece binders, framed commendations, even the worn coffee mug Dylan had given me when he was 16. Not as a symbol of anything, just an object that had survived every PCSN deployment. By midday, I was on the highway, headed west, the truck following behind me. The road to Colorado Springs rolled open under a high sky, the Rockies sharpening on the horizon as the miles passed. Each exit marker felt like a checkpoint cleared. No heaviness, no anticipation, just movement forward. When I arrived at my new apartment near the base, the air was thinner and cooler. Mountains rose up beyond the windows, and a creek ran just behind the building. It sounded faint but steady. The movers carried in the boxes, while I opened the balcony door and let the mountain breeze wash through. Unpacking didn't take long. I set up my desk. First, laptop, printer, and a fresh notebook labeled Ward Initiative Launch. The binder of old documents went on the lowest shelf of the bookcase. I didn't need it for defense anymore. It was simply part of my history. That evening, I walked the neighborhood. Families were out on porches, kids riding bikes, a retired master sergeant watering his garden. People nodded as I passed, not because they recognized me, but because it was a habit here to greet a neighbor. I liked that. The next morning, I reported to my new post at the Logistics Command. The office was larger but quieter than my old one, filled with spreadsheets and supply forecasts instead of gossip about who was investigating whom. Colonel Matthews, my new welcomed me with a firm handshake. "We've heard about your record," he said. "Glad to have you here." "Glad to be here, sir," I replied. And demand it. During lunch, I walked across base to meet a small group of spouses and enlisted members who had volunteered to help with the Ward Initiative. We sat at a long table in the Family Resource Center, papers spread out between us. One spouse, a young woman named Carla, told me about her husband deploying for the third time and their struggle to pay for her nursing classes. A staff sergeant described his daughter's dream of studying engineering, but not qualifying for enough aid. I took notes, asked questions, and outlined the first scholarships. "We're going to make the process simple and transparent," I told them. "No hidden hoops, no vague promises, clear criteria, public accounting." Heads nodded around the table. After the meeting, I drove to a quiet park at the edge of town. Sitting on a bench overlooking the creek, I called Dylan. "How's Denver?" I asked. "Good," he said. "Work's busy, but I like it. And I met someone." My eyebrows rose. That was quick. "She's a teacher. Doesn't care about money. Doesn't even know about all that." I smiled into the phone. "Good. Keep it that way until you're sure." He chuckled. "I've learned my lesson." Then his tone softened. "Colleen, thank you. Not just for what you did, but for showing me you can set boundaries without losing your integrity." "That's the only way to keep your integrity," I said. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things. The weather, a new hiking trail he wanted to try, then hung up. I sat on the bench for a while longer, watching the water move over stones. In the weeks that followed, the Ward Initiative took shape quickly. Howard flew out once to finalize the trust documents. We opened a small office on base, staffed by 2 volunteers and a part-time accountant. Applications began arriving. Handwritten letters, emails from deployed parents, transcripts from kids who'd been scraping by. Reading them reminded me of the early days with Mark when every extra dollar felt like a lifeline. I kept my own life simple. No big purchases, no flashy announcements. The website launched quietly with a single page. Ward Initiative supporting military families. Donations started trickling in from colleagues and old contacts who respected the privacy. On base, my work in logistics ran smoothly. The rhythm of planning convoys, managing supply chains, and auditing budgets felt like second nature. But now there was a different energy behind it. Not defense against family sabotage, but the satisfaction of building something constructive. One Friday evening, Colonel Matthews stopped by my office, saw the article in the local paper about your scholarship program. He said, "Good work. It's just getting started," I replied. "Everything starts small," he said. "Keep at it." When he left, I turned off my computer, closed my office door, and walked out into the cool mountain dusk. Soldiers were finishing PT on the field, their cadence echoing faintly. The sight felt familiar but lighter, like a song you know by heart played on a new instrument. That weekend, Dylan visited. We grilled burgers on my small balcony, the mountains glowing pink at sunset. Head told me about the teacher he was dating and his new volunteer work. I told him about the first batch of scholarship applicants. There was no talk of Brianna. At one point, he said quietly, "You seem happy." "I am," I said. "Not because everything's perfect. Because it's honest." He nodded. "Me too." After he left, I sat with a cup of tea on the balcony, listening to the creek below. My phone buzzed once with a text.